Hello and welcome back to the channel. As always, I'm your host, Morgan. Now, every single year, for the most part, many tourists flock to Yellowstone National Park to attempt to get a glimpse at the very famous geothermal features you can find there, such as Old Faithful and Grand Prismatic Spring. Now, of course, there's a lot of fascinating geology that goes into making all of these different features, be it a geyser, a hot spring, a mud pot, or a fumarole. But I'm not really that interested in the geology behind them because my background is biology, so I want to talk about the very fascinating organisms that can be found in these very hot waters and in very close proximity to these very hot waters. These organisms, of course, are the thermophiles. So let's get into this. What exactly are the thermophiles? Well, thermo means heat and phile means lover. Thermo plus phile equals heat lover. Basically, they're organisms that live in very, very hot conditions. They are part of what is known as the kind of extremophile group. And extremophiles are just organisms that live in very extreme environments. So very, very hot, very, very cold, very, very acidic. You get the point, I'm sure. Now, most of these organisms are going to be microorganisms. That is, organisms that can't be seen with the naked eye. They're pretty much too small in the microorganism group. Some of them might be big enough for you to kind of see without a microscope, but in general, you need a microscope. There are things like archaeans, bacteria, some eukaryotes, and of course, viruses. Now, some of these thermophiles can photosynthesize, like the cyanobacteria, but some thermophiles actually use a process known as chemosynthesis to create the base of their food web. And chemosynthesis is very similar to photosynthesis, but instead of using carbon dioxide and water and sunlight to make the metabolites they need, they use chemicals like sulfur and hydrogen, which react with oxygen, and they make energy that is then used to convert the carbon dioxide into biomass. So it's just using what you got. Instead of using sunlight as the energy source, they're using chemicals. So let's get into these groups. Let's begin with the archaeans. So archaeans are generally known as the most extreme of the extremophiles. You can find them in the most extreme environments, pretty much wherever. But what are archaeans? They're these very simple single-celled organisms. They're prokaryotes, so they lack organelles like a nucleus. The types of cells that we have are prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Simple cells are classified as prokaryotic. Archaeans are in that prokaryotic classification. Eukaryotic cells are the more complex cells that have organelles. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's continue with archaeans. And one other thing about these very simple organisms, even though they lack organelles, they have these very tough outer cell walls, which is why they are able to survive in such extreme environments, like these very hot thermal hot springs that are also very acidic a lot of the time. And with that being noted, archaeans usually are found in very acidic environments, like pH is less than 3, so very acidic. And in order to keep their insides from also becoming too acidic and essentially dissolving, they have these enzymes that help manage their pH internally. They're usually going to be cream or yellow in color. And then one cool thing about archaeans is that the modern archaeans we see today are thought to be very similar to their ancestors. Partially because of those extreme environments, it's thought that they can't really change too much because extreme environments don't really allow for a lot of biological change. And it's possible that modern archaeans are the closest living things to the original life forms on Earth. So that's a pretty cool factoid about them. The most well-known and commonly isolated genus of archaean is Sulfolobus. They're commonly found in these very hot, muddy, acidic springs around Yellowstone. So if it's an Archean, it's probably from that genus. Let's move on to another simple single-celled organism, bacteria. Now, usually we associate bacteria with causing disease, but pump the brakes for a second, because most bacteria don't really cause harm in humans. But the ones that we know of are, of course, the ones that do. Bacteria are very cool little organisms because a lot of times they can form the base of food webs. And they can do this because they can photosynthesize and chemosynthesize. But it just depends on the species. And you can usually guess whether they're photosynthetic or chemosynthetic by their color. If it's green, orange, or brown, it's probably photosynthetic. But if it's another color, it's likely to be a chemosynthesizer or even feed on other bacteria. Many species of bacteria do occur in the hot springs in Yellowstone, and they come in a wide range of colors from green, orange, red, brown, and white in color, and they can occur in mats or sort of long filaments. And either way, when you're seeing the mat or the filament, it's a lot of single organisms kind of stuck together for the most part. And like the Archeans, bacteria are also prokaryotes, so they are very simple single-celled organisms. And now that we've covered the prokaryotes, let's move on to thermophilic eukaryotes that you can find in and around these hot springs. Now, not all of these eukaryotes we're going to talk about are microorganisms, but they still live in these extreme environments, so they're still cool. So we're still going to talk about them today. And these are the things that actually end up turning these very extreme environments into the thriving ecosystems that they are. Because if you only have the base of the food web, you don't really have a full ecosystem. A few types of eukaryotes that you're going to find in these thermo environments are going to be things like algae in the Norris Geyser Basin, so photosynthetic eukaryotes that are occurring in these very hot waters. You can find predatory protozoans like Vorticella, and this can pretty much only be found in the Obsidian Creek, and it feeds on the bacteria that live there. There's also a fungi that has developed a symbiotic relationship with the grasses that live in the very hot soil near the hot springs. So these fungi live in the roots, and based on the study that has been done, the grasses need the fungi to survive and the fungi need the grasses to survive. So together, they can live in these very hot soils. And then there's also a fly species that's a big deal in these ecosystems, the ephedrid fly. You'll see them kind of living among the thermophilic mats that are floating on these hot springs. They'll lay their eggs on the mats, and then the adults are also prey for spiders, beetles, and birds. So now that we've talked about the living things, I did mention viruses earlier, so let's pause and talk about viruses. Now, viruses are not technically alive. They're basically just a protein coat and some genetic material, and they need a host to reproduce. So on their own, they are not living technically, but definitions are weird. The important thing to remember is a virus, while it is biological, it's not alive. They suspect that there are many viruses in these thermal pools throughout Yellowstone National Park. However, they only know of one, and it's found in the Congress Pool at Norris Geyser Basin and infects Archeans in the genus Sulfolobus, which makes sense since that's the genus that's most commonly isolated and most commonly found. You may have noticed that I've mentioned what color these organisms are a lot, even though they're microorganisms and you can't see them with the naked eye. Well, the reason for that is all of these beautiful colors that you see in Grand Prismatic Spring and other hot springs are actually created by a lot of these thermophiles just thriving where the water conditions are just right. So the ones that like it a little cooler will be at a specific radius from the center, where the waters are a little cooler. The ones that like it a little hotter will be at that specific radius where the waters are a little hotter, which gives you this effect of the different rings of color. Because even though one single one of any of those little microorganisms you can't see, when you get a bunch of them together, you see these bright colors. Originally, they thought that these colors came from mineral deposits, but now that more modern science has gone in there and we've actually investigated, we do understand the colors come from these microorganisms, which is so cool. And sure, the geology is cool, minerals, all that stuff, but again, I'm a biologist. I think the biology is cool, and thermophiles are cool because they're living where it's way too hot to live. But that's all I have for you today. I do hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day, afternoon, evening, what have you. Have you been to Yellowstone and seen all this? Did you know the colors came from little living organisms? Leave the answers to those questions and anything else you would like us to know down in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Thank you again for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and ring that bell if you would like to see more. And if you'd like to follow me on any of my other social medias, the links are down in the description below. Don't forget to check out thereptilegoth.com for all of my articles and blog posts. If you found any value in this video and you would like to help support the channel, please check out my Patreon page. That link is also in the description down below. And a special thanks goes out to my Diamond Dragon patron, Diane V. What you're doing is really helping me fund a dream here. I will see you guys all in the next one.